Kel'el Ware is one of this draft's most interesting first-round bigs. This is floor and ceiling. Let's break him down. At this stage, I think Ware is at his best when his role is narrowed down. The Indiana center stands at almost 7'1" in shoes with a wingspan a little over 7'4" and a standing reach around 9'4". Those measurements place him in the company of Hassan Whiteside, or if we're looking at this year's draft, Alex Sarr. The tools and the means are clearly there for Ware to be effective at the basket, but now it's a matter of him putting everything together. This season was definitely a great step towards that. Ware was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school where he was teammates with Nick Smith Jr. However, his freshman season at Oregon was very underwhelming before this breakout year. A big part of that, in my opinion, is that Ware started to define his role on the floor much better, and as a result, he got more continuity. During his freshman season, I thought Kel'el had a tendency to coast in and out of games, but his engagement level and production this time around was much more encouraging. As a sophomore, more than half of Ware's total shots came at the rim, where he cashed in on 73% of his attempts. Ware finished the season with 63 dunks, and I think there should be a clear path forward in the NBA for him as a catch and finish, vertical spacing lob target. The Indiana prospect is both bouncy and equipped with a large catch radius. He's not that physical near the rim, which we will get into, but overall, he'll catch and finish and dunk. If the big man isn't throwing it down, then Ware also has decently soft touch around the basket. This might also project into his jump shot, and we will also dive into that. But for now, I'm more interested in Ware acting as a play finisher in the paint and around the rim. One final note here is that I've seen some comparisons to Dereck Lively, and I understand the idea in terms of role, but I thought Lively went to the basket and still does much more aggressively. Still, if he's to be a star in this role, then I am looking for some improvements from Ware as a finisher. As I said, his college percentages were good, so this is much more so about his NBA future. Although he's the bigger player most of the time, Ware can still struggle against contact or even length, even if the pressure is slight. In general, he's not very physical. When he's rolling, Ware doesn't really move defenders out of the way, and he's unable to consistently create space with his body. His comfort level with this as a whole needs to improve, because even when he's screening, this applies as well. Ware doesn't always create space for himself and his ball handler. Most of the time, it seems to me like he prefers to kind of slip or brush the pick. So I'm looking for Ware to be assertive every single time he looks to attack the basket. I'm curious about how much he'll struggle at first against centers in the league, because at this stage, I cannot see his 70% finishing at the rim in the half court carrying over at least until a few years from now. Becoming more of a rim runner and playing in a faster offense than Indiana's this past season might help offset this to some extent, but that's in transition, and in the half court, Ware's finishing in the pick and roll is going to be the most important item. I'll be looking to see if Ware can finish over and against help defenders, and whether he can be aggressive on his rolls all of the time to put pressure on the basket. Sometimes I think that Ware can still really settle in traffic, but it is true that he should theoretically have more room to work with in the NBA. Quickly, I want to address Ware's motor. This is a slight concern for me, but not because of anything off the court. As far as I know, Ware cares about getting better, and the draft process intel on him is checking out nicely. So rather, what I'm referring to as motor is really his capacity to repeatedly make multiple efforts on the court. Like I've mentioned, I think Ware lacks a certain physicality, which prevents him from maximizing his physical tools. His strength, I think, is the biggest thing that needs to become more functional, because he's 230 pounds, but I don't see that reflected in his game as much as it should. Stepping outside the paint, the other selling point on Ware tends to be his shooting potential. At first glance, he had a very nice season, converting around 43% of his threes and also making shots from the mid-range and around the elbows. In truth though, I think that this aspect of Ware's draft profile is a little overstated right now. Starting with the good, his 3-point percentage is definitely that, but we do need to contextualize it. Ware took only 43s all season, and he only had one pull-up, which he missed. At Oregon as a freshman, Ware made 15 of his 55 attempted threes, which would put him at around 27% from downtown. Thinking big picture, Kel'el's shot looks fine, but I do question how functional it can be early on. Outside of taking a spot up or two a game, I'm not sure that there's much there, and even that might not be a thing until a few years down the line. Of course, this would have some value, but I think only up to a certain degree, because taking 2 threes a game and making one here and there doesn't really give a player legit shooting gravity. Getting closer from 2-point range, Ware shot 4 for 18 on his jumpers, including 1 for 8 off the bounce. Again, the numbers are not good, and they're not great from the free throw line either, seeing as how Ware shot 63% at Indiana on 134 attempts from the charity stripe. That's not to say that there's not a foundation here in terms of a jumper, but I'm only seeing it a few years from now, if that. Ware had a good year in the post, and I think he has some NBA potential here, even though he will have to quicken things up. Analyzing the numbers, Ware has solid touch, making half of his runners for the year and a little more than half of his hook shots as well. Kel'el is huge at almost 7'1", and even though he's not that physical, he can handle the ball in the post a little bit and then shoot over the top of most defenders. Ware likes to line up on the left block and then get to his right hand. Often that means a sweeping hook shot. The Indiana big is not necessarily dislodging guys or burying them under the basket. That's definitely an improvement point. However, he is problematic with his size and touch, plus Ware can also lean into defenders and be a bother while he's finishing. His biggest limitation, yet again, has to be physicality and strength. Ware really should find it easier to create advantages in my opinion, but he can't really do that as well as he should because he doesn't always get to his spots. It's worth mentioning that Indiana played through Ware a lot with his back to the basket, but this will almost definitely happen a lot less in the NBA. It's also worth paying attention to Ware's fall-away shot, which I thought, at least in college, he was able to use to offset some concerns with his strength and accentuate that shooting potential. This fall-away didn't always go in, but it definitely was in Ware's arsenal, so if he can perfect it, it's a pretty good shot to have because it can be nearly unblockable given his dimensions. Kel'el profiles is much more of a play finisher, but it's worth discussing his passing and playmaking. This season, Ware averaged an assist and a half per game, with his turnovers slightly above that at 1.6 a night. Broadly, he didn't assist or turn the ball over that much, but I did think there were some solid reads over the course of the year. If Ware was able to provide some facilitating, then he would become even more interesting. At Indiana, when he was passing, this mostly came out of the post. Ware was comfortable inviting soft double teams and then kicking the ball out, usually to a 3-point shooter, but sometimes also to a cutter. Largely, he facilitated with his back to the basket, but as I mentioned, I'm not sure that he'll play in the low block as much in the NBA. Ware should also receive less touches as a whole, so even though this type of passing was fine in college, I don't find it that translatable to the next level. Instead, I'm more curious to see if Ware can develop as a passer out of the pick and roll and out of handoffs. There were some scarce flashes this season, but I think the results are still very inconsistent. Simply put, the production is not at the level where I feel comfortable projecting Ware in this area. To be honest, this might boil down to something as easy as Ware profiling is much more of a play finisher than anything else. There's nothing wrong with that, but it would need to be factored in. Ware can make some reads, but his intent most of the time is to score, and his teams will probably be better off, especially in the short term, if other players are the ones passing and Ware is being set up. At this juncture, the Indiana prospect's processing speed is still slow and his deliveries can be inaccurate. Kel'el Ware has the tools and developmental pathway to become a good defender, but I'm not very high on him on this side of the ball. That's because I think he has to improve on quite a few things and then put them all together. But let's start with the good, which is that Ware impressively averaged almost 2 blocks per game as a sophomore. The physical dimensions come into play here, given that he's 7'1" with a 9'4" standing reach. I find Ware to be at his best when he can hang back at the rim, track plays, and then get a block. He times himself fairly well when he can see how things develop, and even though there's a bit of a flat track bully element to this and how Ware feasts against weaker teams, I'm not reading too much into that. Ware is more effective when he's more static, which usually meant playing in drop coverage at Indiana. That way, he didn't have to move around a whole lot, and if he played his angles solidly, the Indiana big man could take away the guard's shot and lob pass. Ware's instincts are not amazing, we'll get into that shortly, but his physical tools give him easy rim protection potential, and his discipline has somewhat improved over time. Kel'el is huge and tough to shoot over, especially for college guards who tend to be smaller. We saw that play out this year when players got into the paint and opted not to test Ware. However, I'm more focused on what Ware needs to clean up, which I honestly think is a lot. In space, I'm not confident in his ability or fluidity backpedaling. Ware is a pretty good vertical athlete, but he's not that athletic sliding backwards or sideways and having to cover lots of ground. For instance, Alex Sarr has very similar measurements, but he moves far, far better. Or, since I mentioned Derek Lively earlier, Lively is a lot smoother tracking back, playing different angles, and showing higher up the floor. Ware doesn't stand out to me as being versatile reading or defending ball screens, and if he can only play in drop, then he's sort of limited. Ware is okay there, and he's improved some, but he's not great or maybe even consistently good by any stretch. I covered earlier that Ware's motor was improvable in terms of making multiple efforts, and this is very apparent on this end. Ware can be late reacting, or maybe he won't even react at all to events on the floor. He tries to get a lot of blocks, and he does, but he also ends up fouling too much for my liking, and I'm not sure that his hand placement is great on some of these avoidable fouls. While Ware's discipline has improved, it needs more work still, because in addition to these sloppy fouls, Kel'el can also be far too jumpy. Leaving his feet so early opens up the possibility to get more rejections, but also to give up more wide open looks, which I think would largely be the case in the NBA. Overall, his defensive tools exist, and he's shown that he can be effective in drop coverage, but Ware's engagement level, strength, reads, and versatility leave me wanting more. 7'1" bigs who can provide two-way vertical spacing with glimpses of shooting and NBA athleticism do not come along too often. That's why I think Kel'el Ware can go as high as the late lottery, but he could also fall to the late first round because I have concerns about his physicality, capacity to make multiple efforts, as well as his defensive switchability and timeline. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, make sure to leave a comment telling me what you think of Kel'el Ware, and if you enjoy the channel, if you want to watch more content like this, make sure to subscribe. Take care, and I'll catch you guys next time.